Hello, everybody. I'm Dan Liebenson, and I'm here with B'nai Lappi for this week's episode of the Oral Talmud. Hey, B'nai.
Hey Dan, how are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Good. You
Yeah,
know, a little bit depressed about the state of the world.
yeah, um,
Same old.
yeah. I feel like what we are trying to do here is the opposite of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, in the sense that, in the sense that I think that the reason why this matters, what we're doing, is because we believe that at its best, Judaism and other sources of wisdom, and that they're able to um, that they would be able to save the Titanic, right? I mean that they would be, and so on the one hand, you feel like we're taking a break from the world to study Talmud, and that's not how I feel. It's that I feel like this is the most important hour to spend in the week. And I'm not sure I can fully articulate it, but that's what I'm hoping at least.
Yeah, it's far we are always asking ourselves and trying to express why learn Talmud when the world is burning.
Mm,
And it 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 seems like learning is a retreat from and a failure to engage with the world. But I very much don't see it that way. For me, at its core, is an activity which shapes people into the kind of people who, um, walk through the world in a courageous way. And, as I've said many times before, who are not compliant, obedient, naively believing, but people who are challenging and who aren't likely to want to accept what is fed to them, and not seeking simplicity, but able to hold complexity and nuance and contradiction. And, you know, as we were watching the debates last night, you know, what this activity is trying to create are the people who will listen to some of the untruths we heard last, the obvious untruths, and go, that's obviously untrue. Not, oh yeah, that makes sense, right?
mm.
So,
I would
and
say,
yeah,
go ahead. Sorry.
and also an activity that replenishes those who are, out on the streets and out, making change, because it's just so exhausting. And so, we really need to be nurtured and replenished and recharged to do the work. And it's also a spiritual practice that does that. But more than anything, I think it's it's something that shapes people into the people who walk through the world, um, making the kind of change that's needed, and being courageous.
Well, I want to draw a little bit of a connection to what's going on in America now and what we're doing in the Talmud. I mean, we've talked about it many times on this show, but like the idea that what we've been doing for the last bunch of weeks, and we'll be doing in the weeks ahead with different texts, is looking at this uh, moment where the rabbis, in this sort of reimagination of Judaism, we can call it, in America, there's been a second founding, right? People talk about the second founding after the Civil War, and maybe we need a third founding now. And that, and also in Judaism, and we talk about the second founding in a sense being what the rabbis did. And Yitz Greenberg, we talked about the third founding, maybe now, the third era. And what we see happening in the second founding of America, I think, I would argue, and in the second founding of Judaism here with the rabbis, includes that they introduce new values, not new values, that's the wrong word, new encapsulations of values that they believe were ancient, but were somehow not really fully put into action, perhaps in part because the opportunity to put them into action wasn't available. It may have been available physically, but psychologically it hadn't yet become available. And now we're really gonna add that in. So to be specific about it, so here they're talking about, making sure that we understand that that Judaism is fundamentally about the value of life. And it's actually interesting because like so many people today, rabbis will almost casually say Judaism is about nothing other than, the choosing life, and the power of life. I mean, Yitz Greenberg says that. I mean, that's very true of rabbinic Judaism. Is it true of the Torah? Not. It says it, it says that choose life business, but we saw that was actually kind of a misreading by the rabbis, a very positive misreading, but it's not clear that Judaism has always been for that. And in the second founding of America, right, there were these new amendments added to the Constitution. So there was a much more literal and a much more overt reconstruction of America, so that by adding these new amendments that gave rights to new classes of people, that did all kinds of things, including the process of amendments itself. And there have been a lot more amendments since the Civil War than there were before the Civil War, because there became, I think, I would argue, this sense that America is more dynamic, or it needs to be, in terms of these sort of founding values, and we can sort of retroject these founding values by amending the Constitution, which is a weird thing because on the one hand, think about the 19th Amendment of giving women the right to vote. On the one hand, that was 100 years ago. We're celebrating the 100th year now, and on the other hand, by making that an amendment to the Constitution, it's as if, in a way, it was in the Constitution, which we all know was from 1789. And so it's like, that's the kind of process that's going on here, and I think that when we think now about what we need, and if we need that in America, if we need that in Judaism, to my mind, the way that you kind of think about, do we need this? We said, well, we just had a civil war. It seems like we need something, right? So now, we just had, whether it's Trump or whether it's, what is it that we're afraid of? Cultish behavior. We just got to make sure something is amiss. Like our system's not working, so it has to be reconstructed. And that's, I think, what we're seeing here in the Talmud is how the rabbis were kind of going about that. And for whatever reason, I mean, I'm not sure if we see it as good or bad, amending the Torah was not really a thing. It wasn't, they didn't feel, or they didn't want to, or they didn't feel like you could do that, or that time had passed. So they didn't amend it per se, but they functionally amended it.
Yeah, for sure. Effectively, they did. And they even called what they were doing Torah.
Mm-hmm.
So, right?
Yep.
Great sales pitch.
Yes.
Wait, I think today I have to go get my tile contour gauge. Okay, I think it's right over there. Okay, hold on one second.
It's one of Benet's favorite, what do you call those things where you demonstrate tangibly? What's that called?
Realia?
No. Anyway, I'm having a lot of hard time finding the words today for some reason.
I am too. Maybe it's because I only just had my coffee. Okay, this is my tile contour gauge. I got it at a hardware store, and it's what you use to cut a piece of wood, for example, baseboard. Sorry, that's my dog.
Okay.
I would put myself on mute, except I'm talking. And you press it up against the contoured piece that you want your new piece of wood to match, right? And on all these little pieces, you can see that they kind of go up and down, and they're locked together with this I don't know, piece of aluminum, but they float up and down freely. And when I saw it, I thought, yes, this describes how traditions work, because traditions have a certain number of, okay, the analogy doesn't totally work, because we definitely occasionally add extra pins, but in any case, there are some number of values and principles and ideals and goals, and your original received tradition, even though of course there's never an original story, but the one you receive has a certain contour, and the contour reflects the priority or the prominence of each individual value. So a really high pin is kind of like, oh yeah, that's a really important thing.
Mm.
And a low pin is like, it's in there. The idea is in there, but it's, it's in this half of a verse that no one really makes much of. And in different generations, we push up different things and we push down other things. And I think Yitz Greenberg has been so instrumental in taking what I think before him was a pretty minor idea, the idea of being created in the image of God. I
Mm.
don't know. I'm not sure of the history of its popularity. A tikkun olam is a great example, right? It's something
Yep.
that was a little thing, and the reform movement in the 50s, I don't remember exactly the history of it, really has pushed it up. It's not, it's way up there. Yitz has done a great job of pushing up the idea of being created in the image of God, and has articulated what exactly, at least for him, that means. It means that we all are infinitely valuable, we all are unique, and we all are equal. Okay, you can wrap your head around that, right? So that's now a big part. And pikuach nefesh, the rabbis, really high up there.
Mm.
Hey, that's my little contour gauge.
I
So
like
I
it.
think that's the way it works. And I think the question of whether amendments push up things that already are there, or sometimes actually kind of effectively add, I'm not sure. And I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know if Rabbinic Judaism actually added brand new things. Maybe the trick is adding new things and making them look like, they're the fleshing out of some other thing. I'm not sure. I have to think
No,
about
I would have to look at that. I would have to look at all the amendments. But there's one amendment to the U.S. Constitution that failed, right, which was prohibition, and there was ultimately another amendment to remove prohibition from the Constitution. And I wonder, like, again, I have to look at all the amendments. This could be wrong, but I wonder if, in a way, part of it is like it just actually didn't make sense as part of that founding document, meaning like it was kind of rejected, almost like a body rejects, out of the immune system, sort of a foreign body, because even though, of course, the original Constitution was racist and sexist and all these things, there was still some underlying aspirational notion that this is a country, where all people should be created equal. And I think I've talked about this before on this show that, I found Martin Luther King's March on Washington speech so inspiring because it's kind of affirming the aspirational element of America. Not saying America's bad, it's saying America's good, but failing to live up to its ideals. And when you say, yeah, of course, like the founding fathers, like they were racist and that they didn't want African Americans to vote. But now in the second founding after the Civil War, we're going to add that into the Constitution. It feels like an expansion of American ideals, even if that's false, as opposed to we're going to throw in the prohibition of alcohol. Like, well, how does that's not connected to any ideals. And so I wonder in these moments of kind of new foundings, the extent to which you have to at least be able to make some kind of a plausible argument that it is connected to something ancient, and arguably that it's actually an expansion of those ancient principles so that more people will be included rather than less people. Otherwise, I wonder if it would be kind of ultimately cast out by the immune system. I actually, when I was a law professor way back when, I testified in the state legislature in Minnesota, and this was about a same-sex marriage amendment, anti-same-sex marriage amendment. And my claim there was that it's just not the function of constitutions to restrict, access. If you want to make a law that, okay, but because laws can be overturned if the public sentiment changes. But if you're trying to put something really deep into the, fabric, almost like retrojecting it into the founding fabric of our society, then, that always goes in one direction, towards expansion of our ideals. Whether that's true in a functional, is that true in a factual way? Maybe, maybe not, but certainly that's how I see like the sort of aspirationally. So when we're trying to do, like now, if we're talking about America or Judaism, and we're talking about a third founding, the question would be like, are we just sort of randomly changing things in Judaism? No, we're changing things in ways ideally that should expand participation and expand meaning making.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think the rabbis do it so well that they've actually shot themselves in the foot, because they've hidden kind of the legislative history and the process of doing that, unless you're reading the text with, you know, David Kramer's lens, the tradition, what I would call a traditionally radical lens. Then you can see it. But the Talmud, you know, is I think we've said before, is in many ways a failed document, in that it has so effectively hidden the work of taking a little bit of an idea and expanding it, or of yeah, of showing the work of the rabbis in radically expanding or transforming the tradition, that the how-to has been largely lost. But if you read it and ask yourself, why does the text say this way? Why is the proof and the substantiation for this law this way and not that? Then you can see what's going on. Yeah, I think that's what they're doing, and they did it well. They did it so well that there's not even the clarity that amendments were needed. It's like, no, this is what it always meant.
Well, that's why I love the story about Rabban Gamliel being kicked out of his position and the gates being open so much, because not only are the gates opened and all these new students come in, but the first thing they do is take up the case of an Ammonite convert who shouldn't be allowed to become a Jew, and they let him become a Jew. Meaning, like, that to me shows that it's always about the expansion of participation. And again, it's not saying that explicitly, and we could say it's a failed document because it didn't really, people haven't read it that way for a long time. You know, they missed that part, or you know, even in contemporary times, they kind of are excited about the idea of the gates opening and all these yeshiva students flooding in, but they don't read it to the next paragraph, which shows that what they do is expand it even more, you know, but it's there. And you know, now we can uncover it. And so, you know, and by the way, there's also possibilities that there's some prohibition amendments scattered within, meaning like sometimes we can look at some of what's in the Talmud and say, yeah, that was a mistake, right? That was not consistent with this orientation.
Yeah, and I shouldn't say it's a failed document. Sorry, it's it's a failure on the reader's part. Clearly, it's a failure of our institutions and our yeshivas and leadership, and the willingness to equip the next generation with the tools to make change. Yeah.
So let's jump back into this text, and then if we get through it, this is our last show where we're going to be looking at this text and from Tractate Sanhedrin, and then if we have time today, and if not, then next week we're going to go on to a new text in Tractate Yoma. But it continues to be about this question of what were some of the deep values that the rabbis were bringing into Judaism in this second founding, and what were they kind of seeing was missing previously, that was shown to be missing by whatever crisis they had just experienced, and where they saw that things were missing, and then what are they reintroducing. And part of that is to see and embrace the wonderful things that they have reintroduced, which I think we've talked about before, but like I more and more have become troubled that the Torah is so central to most of the American Jewish experience, which has much more to do with Protestantism than it has to do with anything Jewish. And so instead, all these people are reading the Torah, but the stuff that was in the Torah was, you know, was written out of, you know, it was like read out of functionality like 2,000 years ago. Why are we reading that without the time? So this whole part about like just understanding and appreciating what the rabbis themselves built onto Judaism that a lot of people don't know about, and the question of what do we do now if another layer has to be built.
Right. You know what came to my mind as you were talking, totally separate from what you were saying, is that question of what might they or could they have chosen to build out this idea of the prominent, the importance of life as the, ultimate value, they actually could have made a much better case. Because if you think, what might they have been expanding? The verse you referenced was, I don't know if you said it or you just made me think of it, but choose life, right?
Yeah.
That would have been the obvious proof text for pikuach nefesh, but they don't use that. That's interesting. Like, this is occurring to me only right now.
They choose and you should live by them.
Right. They choose and you should live by them, which clearly doesn't mean anything like choose life or life is important. The word live there is for sure contextually meaning live by, as in observe, conform to, be, follow them, live by them, meaning follow them. So the choice of that text over a more obvious text that would have made it a more obviously better case for the expansion of the idea of life being the most important thing is interesting. And, if I put on my David Kramer hat, David, I hope you would agree with me. I think what he would say, and what I think is the traditionally radical read, is that the stama, or it's not even the stama here, but it's an Amora who is, a later rabbi who's using this verse, is not only providing a proof text, he's ultimately providing the means of establishing something for which there is even less of a biblical precedent. He's saying, look, I could have gone the easy way, but I'm going this way to show this ridiculous way, this laughable, forced proof to show you that making a very bold new claim in a forced way is possible, is legit, and you can do it even when you don't have a better choice. Even though I did have a better choice. V'charta v'chayim is a better choice. Choose life would have been a better choice. But I don't need to have a good choice to make the move I want to make. And I think ultimately that's what the rabbis are over and over and over showing us when they use forced proof texts from the Torah to make new claims. They're saying that's our job to make these new claims. And these new claims don't have to be rooted in the tradition exactly. They can be in the penumbra of the emanations. Even though now that you and I have thought about that some more, penumbras and emanations might have more of a foundation in the Constitution than it even appears. But anyway.
Yeah, just to explain that briefly, like when we were talking, I think offline the other day, like we realized like this idea of on the one hand, the penumbras and emanations, you could say was like a ridiculous way of they could have gone more straightforward. But there is this idea that what's the principle in math? I think is it the principle in math? Like the idea that it's like the inductive reasoning versus deductive reasoning, or vice versa.
I always get those mixed up.
Okay, but it's like the idea that you can have like three pieces of evidence, and you can say, what is the principle that's common to these three items? And now I can take that principle and apply it to a fourth question, and that would be that would at least be one valid way of finding the answer to that fourth question. Versus saying that I can't do that, I can only try to make an analogy between question 4 and question 1, and if I can't, then question 2, and then question 3, and if I can't make an analogy between any of those, then I'm stuck. Then I can't solve question 4. And if you think about that level of abstraction, that inductive, I think it's inductive reasoning, that would be the penumbras and emanations. I mean, that would be another way to put it would be to say foundational principles, right? That the right to privacy is actually the silent underlying principle that supports all of these other principles like freedom of speech and freedom of the press and whatever. And, that you could still argue against that. I mean, you could still say that's not how legislation works and that's overly broad, but it's not crazy. It's not ridiculous. So,
yeah.
So should we jump back into the text?
Yeah, let's.
Okay, so just as a reminder, this text is about when you should allow yourself to be killed rather than transgress any Torah prohibition? And the answer is, although the Torah doesn't say this, the rabbis say always, you should always, I mean, never, you should never allow yourself to be killed rather than transgress. You should always transgress.
The double negatives are really complicated, and they're so complicated that this next piece we're going to do today, I realize I completely misunderstood because of all the double negatives. Okay.
So you should always transgress the Torah rather than allow yourself to be killed, except for three exceptions where when you should allow yourself to be killed rather than transgress the Torah, and those are if you're being asked to do idol worship, if you're being asked to do various sexual impermissible things, and if you're being asked to murder somebody else. Those are the three things that you should not transgress, and you should be killed rather than transgress. In Hebrew, Yehareg Val Yavor. And we have been exploring a little more deeply some of those exceptions, because if those exceptions are narrowed, then that means you have even more transgression opportunities, right? It's like transgress, except for this very particular kind of idol worship, right? Or this very particular sexual thing, not all the sexual things, but just this one particular, and if those categories of the exceptions are expanded, that would mean that you should have less opportunities to transgress than you might. Those might be these bigger principles that you have to be more careful about.
Right.
Okay. So now we are looking at this question of the potential that it's not only a question of the thing itself, like the transgression itself, but maybe the times in which we live have some, or what's going on in the world around us have some impact on whether or not we're able to transgress. That's what this next part is about.
Exactly right.
Okay, so let's take a look at it. So again, this is in Tractate Sanhedrin, 83b. Is that right?
74a.
Oh, sorry, 74a. Okay, don't listen to me. Okay, so this is from Tractate Sanhedrin 74a. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Israel, from Israel to Babylonia, he said that Rabbi Yochanan said, "The sages taught that one is permitted to transgress prohibitions in the face of mortal danger only when it is not a time of religious persecution. But if it is a time of religious persecution, when the Gentile authorities are trying to force Jews to violate their religion, even if they issued a decree about a minor mitzvah, one must be killed and not transgress."
Okay. So I don't know if I should go into what I thought this meant all these years, or we should just unpack what it probably actually means.
Okay. Well, let's whatever you like.
Well, okay. I used to be really excited about this piece of text because I thought it was further limiting the exceptions, meaning allowing you more room to transgress rather than be killed. Oh, you're being asked to bow down or die. Well, if it's not a time of persecution, that's okay. Go ahead and bow down. Only if it's a time of persecution do you not bow down. I don't think that's what Rav Dimi is saying. I think Rav Dimi is saying that, by the way, Rav Dimi was an Eretz Israel guy. There were these two communities. There was the community in the land of Israel and the community in the diaspora, which was in Babylonia. And the rabbis would go back and forth and kind of bring over traditions and, oh, you know what they're saying over there in Babylonia? You know what they're saying over there in Eretz Israel? This is what's going on there. This is what passes for the law on this topic, or what's being discussed. And Eretz Israel was kind of a more central, authoritative place. Yet, if a teaching was brought over to Bavel that was sort of extant in Eretz Israel, it didn't necessarily change the law in Bavel. But it's interesting that the editor is including stories about rabbis from the land of Israel coming over to Babylonia saying, hey, they're saying something different over there. Here's what they're saying. So we should put a sticky on why these stories are even included, because they don't actually limit the law. As we've said many times, the Talmud is really not interested in determining the halacha. What do you do? That's not what this text is about. That's a law code, and we don't get Jewish codes for another 1,000 years until we get essentially to Rambam. This is more of a textbook, a record. It's hard to find exactly the right analog to what the Talmud is, but a record of legislation, a textbook for how to do it. So here comes this story of Rav Dimi, who's saying now, over in Eretz Yisrael, Rabbi Yochanan, who was a big cheese over there, had a different idea about when it was okay to, let's see if I got this right. When it's okay to transgress rather than die.
Right.
Not when you could do the exceptions, not when you should die rather than transgress, but the reverse. That's where I made my mistake. Okay, what he's saying is the place is the time. There is a contextual factor, like you were saying. And the contextual factor actually matters, and you actually should give up your life rather than transgress more frequently than they all think over there in Bavel, namely when there is when there's a time of particular persecution. I think that's I have that right?
Yeah, I think when it is a time of persecution, you should transgress less often. Right? You should die more often.
Right. Meaning you shouldn't. I think the entire rule of Pikuach Nefesh is not operable. In other words, you don't get to transgress at all, even to save your life, if it's a time of persecution. Whereas in Babylonia, which is what we should assume the law was, or the idea was before this, was regardless of whether it's a time of persecution or not, I hope I have this right, you should transgress everything rather than die, with those 3 exceptions.
Right.
So Eretz Yisrael says, no, if it's a time of persecution, you don't get this radical heter, this radical permission to transgress.
And why would that be? Like, why in a time of persecution would you be? Because you would think that maybe you would say, well, it's a time of persecution, you should transgress more because there's a lot more. It's not a rare situation. Maybe that's the reason, because it's not rare. But like it's happening all the time where people are saying, by the way, like I guess we could think here to some extent about like the Spanish Inquisition, right? And like this idea that there were these secret Jews, right? The conversos. That's a more extreme version because they actually converted. But like, there's people, let's say for the purpose of the argument that they didn't officially convert, but they kind of stopped practicing Judaism outwardly, and they would eat ham sandwiches and whatnot because otherwise they would be persecuted. You would think that they would say, oh, well, that's actually the best time to allow this because otherwise people are going to be killed right and left. But that's the opposite of what the Talmud's saying.
Right. Okay, so Rashi has to pipe up about this, which means it's not obvious. So the fact that we have the question is right. And what Rashi says is the reason that you should not transgress in a time of oppression, even to save your life, is that if you should not transgress. Oh my God. I cannot process their okay. I'll tell you what Rashi says, and you help me put it together. Okay. So Rashi says that so that the non-Jewish folks, the star worshipers, don't become accustomed to terrorizing us and making our hearts be all torn up about like what am I going to have to transgress next?
Uh-huh.
So
Well,
yeah.
so it feels like, I mean, the way I think it's consistent with what Rashi's saying, but the way that I would understand something like this just logically would be, look, if it's a peaceful time and so, and some anti-Semite shows up at my house and says, eat a ham sandwich or I'll shoot you. But the only good that would be served from me not being shot would, being shot would be like nothing, because nobody's even going to know about this. And like, it's not like this anti-Semite has a whole lot of followers or anything. So like, nothing's really going to, then I should save my life, because what good am I doing by dying? Whereas in a
Yeah.
time of persecution, if this is happening commonly, then we would say, well, we've got to kind of stand up to them. We've got to show, first of all, like if I eat a ham sandwich, then everybody's going to be watching, because this is like in the air all the time. So all the Jews are going to start eating ham sandwiches all the time, or or the flip side, like these anti-Semites, of whom there are now many, are going to know that all we have to do to get the Jews to stop practicing Judaism is threaten them. So it'll incentivize them to turn up the heat more and more. Whereas if we kind of stand firm, then who knows what'll happen, but at least we're not incentivizing them to turn the heat up more and more.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's right. And I want to think about what this means for us today, but you reminded me of what is clear in my mind today. Not much is. I don't know. I'm having a hard time undoing years of understanding this text differently. But in any case, the Talmud discusses how much you should pay to redeem a Jew from a kidnapper who is exacting, what do you call that money?
Ransom.
Ransom. And what it says is a community may not offer communal funds more than X amount of money, and it's a pretty low amount. And the Gemara says, why? Isn't a life worth more than that? I mean, it's like really a low amount. And the text says, if we actually pay the amount that we believe this person is worth, which of course is unlimited, it would encourage those people to continue kidnapping children and people. And the PS to this text is, an individual is not limited as to how much they can pay to redeem an individual, but a community. Okay.
Well, I mean, it kind of makes me think about like the whole idea of whether we negotiate with terrorists or not.
That's right.
There's a difference between, we don't negotiate with terrorists because it's an organized thing. So if you negotiate with terrorists, then there's going to be another terrorist. Whereas if it's just like one single kidnapper, then like, if you negotiate with them, it's not like more kidnappers are going to come. They're never going to have heard of it because you're just one person, and you're not, right? I mean, and actually, I mean, I think that there are things, like, I don't know all in like South America or Central America, I know that sometimes there are these like waves of kidnappings, and probably that would be a time where you would say we shouldn't pay ransoms because it's actually a wave, and people will hear that the ransom was paid. And so there'll be more and more and more kidnappings. Whereas if it's just like this one time, or it's the Lindbergh baby or whatever, it's like, it's a unique situation. You can do whatever you need to do.
Yeah. Okay. I'm starting to like this text more again for a completely different reason. So now I'm realizing that aside from the issue of the fact that they're actually being less radical on Pikuach Nefesh, they're being more radical on the politics of activism.
Yep.
Okay, I'm getting that. I like that.
All right, so should we keep going?
No, but I want to flesh this out a little. I mean, maybe we should keep going and then go big. But it's making me think about the conversation you and I had last week about, where's our line in the politics of the world right now, and where's the point at which we're willing to put our lives on the line for, fighting for our country. And the fact that there are times when we might say, yeah, this is worth risking my life to defend. Yeah. And there are times when you don't do that.
Yeah.
And can't quite connect the dots, but I'm seeing the overlay in this text. This is saying, yeah, there are times when you lay down your life,
Yeah.
and there are times when it matters.
I don't know if it's exactly fits into this, but it's just to put this other case that's, I think, analogous out, and maybe as things go on, we can see if it fits. But like, there's been these questions over as I mean, there was actually just something the other day that like some legendary figure in public health. I don't know if he had once been the head of the CDC or something like that, but he wrote a letter to the current head of the CDC and told him that he should basically like go he should basically sacrifice himself, in other words, that he should say he should put out some major statement, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but some major statement that said that Trump would hate, like some major statement that we're not going to do X, or we've mishandled this and everybody needs whatever it was. And he said like, and you will get fired because of this. And that your firing will actually bring a lot of attention to it. And maybe it'll get more people to save their own lives, and the argument against, I think that you tend to hear from people that are working in various roles in the administration is that if I were to leave my position, I'll be replaced with somebody who's not as a good of a scientist and not at all willing to push back, and the situation will get worse. And that's seems to be like a reasonable argument. It's like, which is correct. I might think one way, somebody might think another way, but it makes sense that you could make that argument. The question about the argument at a certain point, it transcends the intellectual argument, and then you would kind of look more to like, what do we know about wisdom? What do we know about human history? And we ask, are there really these cases where people have stayed in their position and done good, or usually do they end up co-opted and become part of the evil? If that's what usually happens, then maybe even if there's a chance that you're going to be, is it so likely that you're going to be the one guy that's an exception, and maybe you could actually have more impact by like, essentially self-sacrifice, which nobody ever wants to do, because essentially that's like being a martyr. To be a martyr is a very scary thing. I don't necessarily mean a martyr to sacrifice yourself, whether it's to sacrifice your life or to sacrifice your job, is very, very, very scary. And so people don't want to do it, and so they can intellectualize that I'm going to do better by staying in the job. But it feels like this is raising that kind of question that I think that maybe in a way, since people would generally be less likely to engage in self-sacrifice, it's almost like you would want to say that they should do it more often because they're actually going to do it less than that, right? So you kind of want to want to push the ethic to harder towards self-sacrifice, which makes me also wonder when a law like this that says you should only be killed rather than transgress for these three exceptions. Like, human nature being what it is, we know that people are probably going to sacrifice themselves even less often than that, because they're going to convince themselves that somehow they fall into an exception. Maybe the rabbis know that, and maybe they're actually okay with that. There's a lot of double negatives here.
I know it's really hard. And also the fact that Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, was probably a much more violent, oppressive place for Jews. We know they had it much better in Babylonia.
Right.
So I think the reality on the ground was probably shaping Rabbi Yochanan's position that, you should sort of be an activist even at the expense of your own life. I don't know.
Well, let's keep going, because I think in the next part that now there's somebody coming from Babylonia to Eretz Yisrael, right?
Oh, really? Is he going the other way? Let's see. I think he's going the same way.
No, when Ravine came from Eretz Yisrael, oh, you're right. Okay. So when Ravine came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, he said that Rabbi Yochanan said, even when it is not a time of religious persecution, the sages said that one is permitted to transgress a prohibition in the face of mortal danger only when
Yeah.
ordered to do so in private. But if he was ordered to commit a transgression in public, even if they threaten him with death, if he does not transgress a minor mitzvah, he must be killed and not transgress. So he's even limiting the exceptions even, or I mean, expanding the exceptions even more, right? Meaning saying there's even more times when you should be killed.
That's right. In other words, you have less room to violate. So now we have two new sort of overlays. One is the political atmosphere.
Uh-huh.
Is this a time of oppression or not? And the other is sort of the public awareness of your particular act. Are people going to know about it or see it? And we're going to get into the question of, is public about knowledge, or is it about witnessing, actual physical witnessing?
Uh-huh.
And that's another plane, which is interesting. And I think I can, this is teaching me that I shouldn't conflate the two, which I think I was doing in my mind. That we were talking about, like you were saying, if I do this, is anybody going to know about it? That's this concern here,
Uh-huh.
which isn't or wasn't a concern before, although there is some overlap.
Yeah, maybe it is. I mean, maybe fundamentally, like the penumbras and emanations here is that the foundational principle is that the concern is the public nature, whether that's because it's a time of oppression and so like the oppressors are banded together, right? So they're going to know. It may not, even if it happens in the privacy of my home, the oppressors, the anti-Semite's going to go talk to the other end and say, hey, look, listen to what I did. I came into this, right? And if it's not a time of oppression, but it happens in public, similarly, it's, people are going to find out about it. And so it's likely to cause more of this stuff to go on. To me, I read them as analogous.
Right. Or is the public issue more about the way in which my personal act is going to undermine the sense of confidence, solidarity, resolve
of other
in
Jews.
other Jews?
Yes, that's a better. But then in the same. So then I would say though that then in some sense these are two sides of the same coin. In the case of the time of oppression, it's that the anti-Semites are talking to each other. In the case of the public act, it's that the Jews will talk to each other, and we'll see that, especially if it's like an important leader, that he didn't have the resolve, so what, I should have the resolve, right? So these kind of things lead to a lessening of taking this stuff seriously. Whereas if it just simply happens randomly to you in the privacy of your own home, and it's really just a private act that's not going to have any impact on other people, you should transgress. One of the things that this makes me think about is just like putting aside this whole question of the transgressing and the being killed. It's just that like there's a piece here where the concern is that we have an obligation to conduct ourselves in such a way that we're taking into account the impact on others.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Which I like, because I like the idea that we take seriously that we aren't living only for ourselves.
Right. Okay, so let me see if I can talk this out. So in the land of Israel, they were saying, no. You shouldn't only be thinking about your own life and whether you save your own life or do this forbidden act.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You need to be thinking about the effect of your action on
Mm-hmm.
other people
Mm-hmm.
and on the oppressive policies that are coming at the community.
Mm-hmm.
And those factors should lead you actually to feel less permissioned to violate the Torah. They should constrain you more,
Mm-hmm.
and such that if for example you are in public, or if it's a time of particular persecution. Those are times when you don't get this permission to think only about your own life
Right.
and transgress. You should follow the Torah, resist the command to transgress the tradition, even if it means sacrificing your life.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I think that it would be, to play these things out and to put them in dialogue with what we learned about medicines, right? Like a few weeks ago, the idea of when you can break Shabbat in order to save a life, these exceptions aren't there, right? So, I mean, the point being, like, nobody said over there that you shouldn't break Shabbat in order to save a life if it's a time of persecution. We could potentially like play that out and say, why is that? Because everybody will see that you're saving a life, and so therefore it's actually not sending a bad message, or is it because, is it because it's different in category? I mean, there's possibilities, but I also, I mean, I'm raising this only also because like trying to think about the application to our own time, because. In a way, right, we've talked about replacing the idea of saving a life with acting in a racist way or something that would cause irreparable harm to the earth. And that these are the new principles that we might introduce in a third founding of Judaism that could have the power to override the Torah and the rabbis. And the question is, like, would they be limited? And if we put them in the category of pikuach nefesh, in the sense of saving a life by giving medicine, then we would say they're not, they're always in play. Like there are no exceptions. If we put them in this category of yehereg val yavur, be killed or transgress, right? Then we might say, well, there are exceptions, and we might, bring in those kind of limiting factors. I think I have a sense, I mean, for that reason alone, I would want to put them in the first category, where there aren't exceptions, but it's just another piece in this puzzle.
I'm not yeah. I need to draw this out. I'm not sure if we're connecting the dots the right way. Is the anti-racist act is the racist act equal to the violation?
What I'm yeah, well, we should like keep
we'll keep going. We'll keep going.
But like, no, what I'm saying is that that at a certain point, we might say that. So, for example, here's an example. For Passover, a lot of people they take aluminum foil and and cover their kitchens with it to cover it up, and they use a lot of plastic dishes and silverware and all that kind of thing in order to not have plates that have bread products on them, right? And if we had an ethic that said that the health of the earth transcended law, the rabbinic law and the Torah law, then we to me that's analogous to the idea that you can make medicines on Shabbat. If you said like you can if your only choice is to use plastic plates and dishes and cover your kitchen with tinfoil, then you can have a lower level of then it's okay for your house to potentially have a little bit of bread somewhere. We would rather that you do that and potentially break that law than potentially destroy the earth or contribute to the destruction of the earth by getting plastic stuff just because you think that that's how you're observing Judaism. Like so in that sense, you bring in a new principle that says we're not going to do it that way anymore. Right. And something along those lines. And I think that that's how you would start to bring in these principles and say, we're going to reimagine Judaism, because what we've been seeing is that, so in the way that people, I think the rabbis were seeing, like, hey, Shabbat has gone off the rails, because what we're seeing is that the way people are observing Shabbat in such a strict way that they're not willing to make medicines on Shabbat, and they're dying because they're not willing to make medicine on Shabbat. Or like we talked about the Maccabees, we're saying that we're dying because we're not fighting on Shabbat in a war. Here we're saying we're killing the earth because we are, trying to not have bread in our house on Passover, and instead we're like filling up the world with plastic. So we're going to have to revise what it means to observe Passover to reestablish it in a way that actually accords with not killing the earth. And that's how I'm playing that out.
I think that's right.
And that is not a principle. That is not a principle that was part of Judaism before. The rabbi, we can find text that the rabbi said, yeah, right. But it was very down, and
right.
And I'm saying, like, we can and we should find a text to hinge this on, or find a value to hinge this on. But we also can say, at least here in our little attic, hey, we really know that like that wasn't a serious, and not because we didn't care about the earth, but because it never dawned on any of our ancestors that human beings could possibly do anything that was going to have a lasting impact on the earth. They was like, that's God's role. Like that's, of course. So therefore, but now we can find all these texts and all these values that say we love the earth. I mean, it's actually not just that little quotation that says, don't cut down a tree in a time of war or whatever we can find. It's actually all of Torah. All of Torah, actually. It's just that they'd never imagined that human beings could affect it. Now that we know that human beings can affect it, it becomes a principle of even greater importance than Torah itself, right? Or put another way, it becomes a principle that we believe is so foundational to Torah that now we've discovered that human beings actually can affect it, that we have to sort of show everybody how elevated it is, and that's by saying that this trumps the Torah.
Right. That you should rather give up your life than violate that.
Well,
did I get it wrong again?
I think you got it wrong again. No, so it's that you should rather transgress than give up this thing. You transgress the Torah than destroy the world, right? So in other words, like if you think that Judaism causes you to buy plastic,
yes,
you should transgress the Judaism rather than buy the plastic, because the plastic is destroying the world. So the buying of the plastic is analogous to the not taking medicine on Shabbat. It's in that case, it's killing you. And in the case of the plastic, it's killing the earth. In both cases, we're saying that the thing that you should do is to violate the principle of Judaism that you think would be violated if you didn't, if you took the medicine or if you destroyed the earth. You'd be better to violate that principle of Judaism than to either allow yourself to be dead or the earth to be on the path.
I got it. I think I got it. I think I have it. Okay, let's finish this text up. Because I think it raises the volume even further on this same idea. And just to finish, wow, this is so hard.
It's really hard. It's good, but this is good because like this is to really work through this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Gemara asks,
one of our like principles at Svara is that the teacher, the person in front of the room, can never really own the text more than 80%. It's always the 80-20 rule. You got to go in as a teacher having 20% confusion. And I personally prefer the 20-80 rule, which is I've got this text about 20%, 80% we have to put this together ourselves. And what we find is that it's much more exciting and activating for students to really authentically be in it. So I hope that our listeners are like coming into the into the gap of at least my own understanding. Go, wait a minute, I do have it. Okay.
Yeah, and anyway. I want to say, like, I don't think I'm articulating it yet, but I think I have it. Like I think, like, I think I got it. Like I think, and what I want to, for our listeners, like, and our viewers, I want to just say that, like, I think, like, where we're going with this ultimately is that in a third founding of Judaism, we want to identify principles that maybe weren't conceived of by the rabbis or those who wrote the Torah, etc., like that human beings could possibly destroy the world, or things that our sort of value structures have changed, such as racism or sexism, that they maybe or maybe didn't conceive of, but that certainly we have a different point of view now, and our point of view is more expansive and inclusive. And maybe there are others. We'll discover other sort of types of principles, but it would be interesting to make a list of those principles at some point, and then to start to look at all of Jewish practice and say, what are the cases in which Jewish practice potentially is in conflict with those principles? And we're not saying that these new modern Western values trump the Torah. We're actually saying that we believe that these are fundamental Jewish values, and that we're now sort of amplifying because the world has changed, and so of course those values have to revise the Jewish practice and not the other way around. And it would be nice to start to put some real examples out there, because I think having some examples, that's what I was trying to do with the Passover and the plastic, is like, because then I think we would start to really see like, oh, I get what you're saying in terms of like how the Jewish practice would have to change in order to conform. So in the way that we understand that Shabbat practice has changed in order to conform to the principle of Pikuach Nefesh, because everyone knows you can rush to the hospital on Shabbat if you're having a baby or if you're having a heart attack. Everybody knows that, even though the Torah doesn't say that. So, but that's what we understand, that that's what Shabbat means today. What would it mean in the future when we all understand that the observance of Passover cannot include plastic? That's when we'll know that it's starting to. It's not an exception. It's like everybody knows that Passover practice, you're not allowed to use plastic, right? Like that's or whatever that might be. That might not be
Yep.
the best example in the world, but okay. So the Gemara here says, "What is a minor mitzvah for this purpose?" Right. So they say that you can't even transgress a minor mitzvah. In public. What is a minor mitzvah? Rava Bar Yitzchak says that Rav says even to change the strap of the sandal. And Steindel explains here that there was a Jewish custom, a specific Jewish custom about sandal straps, and how you're supposed to tie them. And if the anti-Semite said you have to tie your shoes the other way, even then you should be killed, right? Even such a minor thing in a time of persecution or in public, right?
Right. I still want to play out anti-racism. To
Okay.
connect the dots. I think I'm going to need help.
If so, I have to think of a case, but it would be a case where.
Oh, let me give you a case. Okay. Let me. I don't know if this is going to work, but this is something that's really live for me right now today. A certain unnamed newspaper has contacted me to ask for a statement about the Supreme Court issue. Justices Alito and Thomas have made disparaging remarks about the same-sex marriage decision and telescoping their desire to repeal it. So this Jewish newspaper has solicited statements from a number of rabbis and Jewish leaders, and we made a very strong statement and we submitted it along with the condition that it is our policy at Svara and personally not to be participants in roundups, panels. It's a roundup, by the way, is an article that's just an anthology of statements and mini essays by a handful of leaders, right, that they've rounded up. That it is our policy not to be involved in those unless the participants that are being represented represent the community. And that, for example, that, particularly on an issue that's about us, no talking about us without us. So on a queer issue, we're not going to be included unless there are at least 2 trans folk speaking and 2 people of color speaking, and otherwise count us out. And they said, well, you know what? We're only going to have 5 people in the roundup anyway. So we said, okay, you can't include our statement unless you have at least 1 person of color and 1 trans person in this roundup. And they came back to us and they said, sorry, we don't have it. we're basically going to have a bunch of white cis people in you. And and we're like, yeah, sorry, don't include us. I don't know. So basically what I'm not sure if this issue, which I'm, dealing with this morning, is relevant, but I think the way it might
but
be
it
relevant.
Felt invented. No,
it did.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so the issue is our value of not participating in what we think is a racist act, right? A roundup of opinions of rabbis that don't represent the community and are only white and only cis and only straight. So violates what we understand to be a Torah mandate of anti-racism, that we are rather, I don't know if because expressing a statement isn't a Torah mandate in the first place, so I'm not sure if this situation quite lays down. I don't know. Is this relevant at all, or am I just?
No, it is in two ways. Like, well, first of all, like, I don't think it's exactly the case that we're talking about for exactly the reason that you just said, because it's like, because the case, what we have to figure out is like a mandate that violates that principle. Like, I will tell you, like, for example, with racism, I still have to like come up with one, because it's not like I don't have one on the top of my head. With sexism, for example, this is something that I've felt for many, many years. I mean, decades, that I will not go to a service where that's non-egalitarian, that like, I just want, I mean, there are exceptions, like went for a family, if whatever. Yeah. But like, for the most part, like, I will not go, because I see the going, maybe this isn't even a good case, because it's not arguably, but I feel like the going to a service like that is, even though it's arguably like a Jewish commandment to go to a service. I mean, it's not a commandment to go to a non-egalitarian one necessarily, but if that's the only one that's there, it might be that you're supposed to go. But
you have the obligation to say your Shachrit, Mincha, and Ma'ariv.
With a minyan, or even like Mourner's Kaddish, or whatever it might be. Like, if you feel like a sense of obligation to do it, but the only synagogue available to you is a non-egalitarian one, then I would take the position that in the next era of Judaism, that one would say it is a greater mitzvah to not go to synagogue than to go to, because of its inherent sexism, than to go and observe the mitzvah of, let's say, in this case, saying in the Mourner's Kaddish, but to be violating this greater principle of sexism, right? And to me, so the question is like, are there Jewish practices that are inherently racist in their practice? And then I would say, if we could think of those would be the cases that I would say that absolutely the answer has to be not to do that practice, because it's inherently racist, and we should think that one through, because it's important. If what you're describing, I think, is it's like there's mitzvot aseh and mitzvot lo taseh. Like so what I'm saying is that you should. So mitzvot aseh, meaning a positive commandment, you should not fulfill a positive commandment if it would violate the principle of racism, sexism, etc. The question about like you're talking about a case where the participation in something that is kind of optional, you should opt not to do that, because you would be doing a mitzvot lo ta'aseh, like a negative commandment, by, in a sense, participating in an act of racial insensitivity or racism, by participating, even though you don't have a positive duty to participate. So you're choosing not to. Those are both important cases. I think they're different, but fundamentally, but the thing that's really important in what you said, I think, is that you are giving up a positive thing for Svara to be in a newspaper article. We all love to be in a newspaper article. Like, you're giving that up because of a principle, and that's how change happens. And if people are not willing to make sacrifices, then change doesn't happen. And not that it's the biggest sacrifice in the world to not be in a newspaper article, but every sacrifice matters. And my fear about like the state of our world is that people just have become, maybe because they're rich, like comfortable, people have become so averse to making sacrifices of any kind that change doesn't happen. So
yeah. And then I'm not sure if I'm misaligning the dots here, but the issue of public and private, and then I know we have to, we're over. The issue of public and private feels very important here, because
right,
it's not going to help that we not be in this roundup unless unless we make
right,
it known that
right,
we chose not to be in the roundup for this reason. So we're going to have to publish our piece on Facebook and say why we
uh-huh,
pulled it from this
uh-huh.
newspaper. And that's where I don't,
Again, it's a different case, but it's
right.
analogous. It's
There's
the principle. You're getting at all the principles that we're talking about. I think it's
but in a mixed up, not enough coffee kind of way.
no. I just think that I think what you're saying is more important. It's like, in other words, you're getting like the principle is the most important thing, and you're fleshing out the principle, which is that you have to be willing to make sacrifices in order to fulfill your sort of public duty, and that there's a difference whether that's done in public or private, and all of those factors. Whether that exactly fits the case that we're talking about as a perfectly analogous case, probably doesn't, but it doesn't matter. Like what we're really fleshing out here is the larger principles, and that's why I think that to draw the connections between all the various cases that we're studying, and that's what we've been saying all along, that the point in the Talmud and in any of this stuff is not the specific cases, it's the connective tissue between the cases, and is understanding that you're intuiting the most important principle of all. And I don't think you need to go through the exercise of trying to say, is it exactly the same case? Because what you're doing is you're abstracting from this case, articulating the larger principle, and saying how you, in a recent situation, experience that principle in a different kind of case. And that's exactly the point. That's what we want to be seeing all across the Talmud. And that's ultimately what we want to be seeing all across whatever the next third founding of Judaism is that what are the new principles that are going to apply in every kind of case?
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
I like that.
All right. Well, we are over. So, but that's okay. But next week we will pick up with a new text, which is from the tractate Yoma, and that is 82A and 82A and 83A. That was why I got confused with the numbers earlier. Okay, so we'll see you next week.
All right. Thanks, Dan.
All right. Bye, Vinay.
Bye.